Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Marketing Hops, where we share pints and perspectives or other beverages across the entire B2B sales and marketing landscape. Let's have a cheers and we'll dive in. Today, I am super excited to welcome Viji to our show, a former VMware SAP executive, Anaplan, incredible career spanning everything from product marketing to being chief of staff to CMOs to being a marketing executive yourself. Welcome to the show. What are you sipping on?
Excellent. Thank you. Nice to be on the show, Jeff. Thank you for having me. And I don't know how much you can see. Yeah, a cup of chai, which is my most favorite drink. I could sip it any time of the day, the Indian chai with milk tea and spices in it. So today I made it instantly, but normally I brew it over the stuff and have it. But this is something I can sip on any time of the day. So.
That's impressive. I can't because it still has like the actual tea in it, and caffeine and me past 1 o'clock don't get along. So I'm working on these non-alcoholic beers have actually been really good recently. Athletic is what I'm sipping on today, and their fest beer in honor of Oktoberfest, with it being September and all as we go through that. So cheers. Thanks for being on the show today.
Absolutely. No.
So let's get into it here. You know, everyone has different things and areas that they're good at. If you ever talk to a marketer and they say they're good at everything, you know they're full of it, right? So I always like to ask, you know, what's your majors and minors when it comes to marketing? And we'd love just to kind of hear, like, what are those areas that you really specialize in, and what are those areas that maybe you lean on others who have that expertise?
Absolutely. You're right. Yeah, you can be a master of all, obviously. I will say the one function of marketing that's super close to my heart, and that I would always love to stay close to, is product marketing. But being close to that allows you to be close to product and to be the glue to sales and to the rest of marketing, and doing messaging, positioning to the external world is something I really enjoy. So definitely one of my top majors, if I may call it. Of course, and then I've also integrated campaigns, and integrated marketing is something that I've done and I'm super familiar with. And I, of course, in the role work very closely with the campaigns for demand gen, revenue marketing, all of those aspects. I think if I say some of my areas that I'm not super comfortable with, or I want to be doing, or that I always have to lean on others, I would say is more like in the area of field marketing and events. That's something I love, going to events. I love hosting events and bringing customers. But that's not something I would do full time. I would definitely have to lean on some experts to do that. That's how I would put it.
People think field marketing or event marketing, if it sounds easy, it's like, oh, you just throw parties, but there's a lot more to it than that. I've had the privilege to ride along with some pretty incredible event marketers in my career, and I'm always blown away by the little details that they think about that just make or break the event, honestly. I want to circle back to product marketing a bit, because that's a loose term that means a lot of different things to different people. So I'd love to circle back on that. But how did you end up in marketing? Did you always know you wanted to be in marketing, especially B2B, or was there something else and you kind of fell into it?
Good question. Obviously, I was an engineer by undergrad. In my undergrad, I did electrical engineering, believe it or not. Don't ask me anything about it. I don't think I remember much these days. But then I ended up being a software engineer, software developer, and I worked both in India and in the US, for large banking clients, developing software, doing project management, all of those stuff before I ended up in business school. So I went to Carnegie Mellon to do my MBA, and that was my first exposure to marketing. But interestingly enough, even when I went to business school, I wrote in my essay, I want to do finance and become a chief financial officer. That's my goal. But very quickly, as I started those finance classes, I was like, not for me. It's okay to know the basics. I don't want to do those advanced finance courses. Then I tried operations. Then I tried marketing. But those first few marketing courses just got me into it. And I ended up so sure by the end of my second year, that's where I majored in marketing. And so I wanted to get into marketing. But as luck would have it, it was the year 2010. So we were just recovering from the recession. So opportunities were hard to come by. So I ended up taking a role at SAP in solution management, which is equivalent to product management, but more customer facing. But my heart was always in marketing. So I networked my way for a couple of years. It took me 2-3 years before I actually ended up in a pure marketing role. And what do they say? Once a marketer, always a marketer. So I've stuck on for the last 15 years or so. I've just stuck on to marketing, doing various functions and in various domains. but B2B marketing throughout for sure.
It's funny, you often hear people in marketing wanting to shift into the product world, not quite as often the other way around as you go through it there. I'm sure they were excited to have you, but yeah, big companies often make that possible though too, right? You're able to stay within the vein, build the reputation, but it's big enough that there are those opportunities as they bubble up. Why SAP? Was it just that was kind of what was open, or was it more so you saw the opportunity to kind of make that shift there?
I could potentially write a book one day about my journey after in my business school and to find an internship and then how I ended up in full time. I mean, 2008, I entered business school with these high dreams and hopes, and the first bank, like Lehman Brothers, falls, and then the series is like bloodbath on Wall Street, and like the opportunities start drying up. And I was an international student on a visa, and so clearly they were like, "Oh, we're not hiring international students." So my internship was like my entire first year was just a full year's effort to find that one job, that internship. So it was a pretty hard journey. And I wanted to get into marketing on top of it. So I ended up, luckily, after a lot of effort of putting in, like doing an unpaid project at first, getting that experience, and then ended up at VMware in an alliance management role. So that served me well. And then, of course, as you rightly said, second year, again, still the market was still recovering. So not many companies. So we, of course, a while, but luckily with that VMware experience, I was able to get into SAP. You know, it was more a consulting role, but by the time I actually joined SAP, I was already part of the reorg. So we were hired. There were about 20 of us that got hired for a consulting role, but then we got told, like, after we signed the offer, that they changed the program and they've put all of us into various solution. But I'm so glad they kept their word of giving us a career and a career journey. Honestly, it started there. And luckily, I was able to pivot into marketing. And I spent almost 11 years at SAP with various cloud business units, going into like HR, like Success Factors. When they acquired Success Factors, I was there for a while. Then I moved into Ariba, which is more in the procurement world, but doing marketing, industry marketing, campaigns. And then, as you mentioned, chief of staff to the CMO. Eventually, I decided I wanted to move on to more hyper-growth companies after spending 11 years in a large enterprise. And that's been going well for the last 3 years. I ended up with a VC funded firm called iCertis in the contract management space, leading their product marketing function, building the team ground up. And then now I'm over at Anaplan, leading product industry and solutions marketing. So,
what would you say has been the biggest differences on kind of going from that big company like SAP into the hypergrowth? Like, what have you noticed? What do you like? What's different? What don't you like?
It's definitely a world of difference. And I will tell you that I'm enjoying this side. That's a big decision that I made to shift. And it was a conscious decision because I knew many people who left big enterprises and then they wanted to come back. So I was like dabbling for a while. I was like, do I stick to large enterprises or should I really want to go into like growth based companies? And the biggest difference I will tell you is in the people and the resources that are at their disposal, where I had like a large team to support every function of marketing. And I had like product marketing. If we had to do even talk to analysts, there were like people available for me to like tap into. If we had to go and say one person's not available, there's another one. And plus also the marketing budgets are definitely larger for each function that you have. Versus in smaller companies, obviously all that is limited. But the beauty of it is you learn so much so quickly. You have to like, you end up learning a lot more functions. You're collaborating more closely with each other. Like, you know what's happening in the field marketing world, how you can support that event. You're giving inputs into like which events to go to, what to do in terms of campaigns, talking to analysts. You're end up wearing multiple hats, but also you're learning and growing yourself and adding value to the role that you're in as well.
Yeah, I think it's like when I was at Microsoft, we'd build these campaigns in a box for the field, and half the time you'd build this thing and it's like, did anybody use it? And I was like, I have no idea, honestly. It's like I uploaded it to the place it was supposed to go and I did my thing. And that, I don't know, there's a lack of, at least for me, there was a lack of satisfaction with some of those experiences. It's definitely one of the reasons I love small companies, but there is definitely something to be said about those bigger firms, the stuff you called out there. Usually their pace is a little bit slower, even if they want to think it's fast as you go through that. But so you say, oh, go ahead.
No, I said, I completely agree with you. Talk about instant gratification. You get instant gratification in growth companies. Like You put out a messaging, the AE will call me instantly. He's like, hey, this worked or this didn't work, like for these
Right.
reasons. I don't think I could get that instant gratification like in bigger companies. You have to wait, you have to go select your AE, what you're like. It comes through multiple people by the time it gets to you. So
Right.
definitely it's there, yeah.
So you've had you've been in a lot of different companies, a lot of broad experience, a lot of different functions inside the world of both marketing and outside of it. As you have kind of gone through your career and become an executive, what have been the biggest challenge or challenges that you've really faced as you shifted into that role?
Sorry, can you restate your question for me also?
Yeah. What are the biggest challenges that you really started to encounter as you were moving up in the marketing world, becoming an executive for the first time? What kind of shifted from being a lower level to a senior person?
Good. Okay. Absolutely. Good question. You're right. Working as an individual contributor, like owning one function to as you move up the ladder when you're learning and working with a larger group. I would say, if there's any challenge that you're encountering, normally you can bucket it into like product market. There's this Venn diagram where product marketing, how it sits at the intersection of like product, sales, the external world, and then all the rest of marketing. And that's how I truly see the role of product marketing. Obviously, the biggest role for product marketing is ensuring like positioning and messaging. What is a product that you're selling? Are you telling that story in the right way, easily for people to understand to the external world? That's your biggest job. But it's like, and it's working with product to bring the products that they do to launch products. Launching products is a key piece of this role. Like, how do you launch? But you also make sure before you go launch it to the external world, making sure your own sales, your field can understand that, your field teams can understand, and like they have all of the materials that are needed to really go and sell that product very well. And then making sure the rest of marketing is aligned, or their campaigns or their events, like all of those aligned to those product, your portfolio, any products that you're launching, that's part of the job. And then all, as I mentioned, the external and making sure an external world is not just customers, right? It includes partners. And for most B2B systems, you should have make sure your partners are enabled. Your analysts, like are there industry analysts, did they understand what we're selling? So it's building a relationship with them and making sure like you're working with them even if you're defining a category. So that's how I see like this all-encompassing role of product. Yes, you're responsible indirectly for the revenue. Yes, you're responsible indirectly for the marketing pipeline. You're working with them to create that pipeline. But at the end of the day, like you're this glue between product and the rest of the organization.
It's really interesting because what I found in my career is PMMs tend to, or PMM organizations, and then I'd throw PMMs in there, tend to fall or lean one of two ways. They either lean more on the product side, where they're kind of an extension of product management. They're doing market research, user research, that kind of stuff. They might even be helping with defining jobs to be done to the product, all that kind of stuff. And then they try to bundle that up and create a sales message out of it. Or they tend to lean to the other side, more the go-to-market, where they are talking to sales, they're looking at pipeline acceleration, all that kind of stuff. And they're trying to take back to product why we're losing. Why does sales say that we're losing? That kind of stuff, and bring that into product, but they tend to be there. Do you agree with that? Am I wrong on that perception? And where do you find most organizations you work with if you agree?
No, I partially tend to agree. I mean, I've seen this in companies. You're right. Like product marketing either tends to lean in one direction where you're more closely leaning towards product, or you're more closely leaning towards sales, like just doing a lot of like, okay, it's sales plays and sales specific materials, like taking the product. And I feel like it depends on the maturity of the company, like where you are. Like in some companies, yes, you have a lot of innovations coming out. Then you're like more leaning towards product and like launching those products, etc. But then it's just one doesn't function without the other. Like if you not, and I've seen that, oh my God, like so many times in my career where some products have been launched and sales doesn't even know about it, or even customers. And like, and of course, if sales doesn't know about it, nobody else is going to know about it. Forget the rest of the world. Right. So, and so that can fail. So that is why I think you have to have a united front, and product marketing is a critical bridge, making sure that both happen, both you're messaging the product right, but you're also positioning it to your sales teams, right? You're driving adoption with your sales, you're driving adoption with your customers. Otherwise, a product, no matter what, is going to fail.
So you hit on.
But
Oh, go ahead.
finish your thought. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Now, I don't know if you saw this recent article from McKinsey on the growing importance of software product marketing managers. That was exciting. They came up with a full-blown article, why and how startups are now making product marketing their first marketing hire these days, versus earlier it used to be demand gen or another
Right.
somebody else that hire first. But now the critical importance of product marketing is coming to life, at least in the software world, for sure.
I think they've seen a lot of it come out with like, I think April Dunford's done a lot of good work in this space recently with like her books on obviously Awesome in Pitch, where it's forcing us to cut out the fluff too. Because I think that's another part that we get in trouble with a lot is we put in marketing fluff and then sales like, I'm not going to use that. And so that's where I think product marketers can get into trouble is they're using marketing speak or feature function speak and they're not talking to the value, or because at the end of the day, like your success is like, does the market receive, and frankly, does your sales team receive the message that you're putting forward? Because otherwise they're going to go completely off message and do what they think works, whether or not it does. So it's definitely a fine line to walk on that, but it is a critical hire, but you still got to find that right skill set.
So true. If you're having to explain your messaging, if you put out a messaging and somebody says, what does it mean? Like, explain it to me, then that means your messaging is not right. Like, somebody's not getting it in the first try. So that's a good rule of thumb.
So you said PMM product marketing is kind of tangential to kind of supporting revenue growth, driving revenue growth, and that. How do you define success? What are the metrics that PMM can put forward outside of like, hey, we produced a bunch of PowerPoints and PDFs for a launch, or like, how do you measure success?
Okay, that's a very good question. And PMM is this unique role too, where it's like it has got all these tangential metrics that the rest of the company cares about. Obviously, like the closed won rate, the revenue, but also the pipeline. Like, yes, we are all responsible for the pipeline and renewal rate and whatnot, right? Like, so because you play a part, the content you create definitely plays a part in each of those campaigns. But apart from that, of course, I always have a set of metrics that I like to measure for product marketing. I think one is the content. There's the qualitative feedback of the content and the quantitative, like how many people. And now I think the tools have matured, right? Like things like HighSpot, etc., are giving you more of analytics into how many people have seen this, how many have downloaded this, and how many have used this content, all of those. So the content metrics is one. The other thing I like to really measure is when I launch products is like, it's either technology, lack of process, or it's a people challenge. And for me, I feel like the people is the hardest thing. And I'm saying it's the hardest because there's a lot more that you have to like put an effort into bringing the people along. And well, journey as the leader, you set the strategy, you set the vision, but it's like also making sure, or you even define a change, you bring in a new process, you build a new technology, but it's absolutely important that you bring the people along. And that's where I will say, like, initially, I think even in hiring, I will say, I learned my very first lesson about dealing with people challenges and why it's important to make right hires right when I took on as a people manager, the people manager role. I did end up making a wrong hire. And despite like taking my time, putting them through multiple rounds of interviews, it was an outlier, but I definitely made a wrong hire. And it cost me so many months of sleep. I can tell you that. Like, I had stakeholders calling me and I was like, okay, like, and then it had to, of course, I had to exit the person out of the role because it was a wrong culture fit. But it also gave me perspective into like what, because that one wrong hire can also suck the energy out of the room. So it's important to have the right people in the right roles. But what also like surprised me was like when you take on as a leader and you're working with people, you also have to look at everybody's strengths. In fact, I describe my leadership style as like strength-based leadership. The one thing to do is like, where do people want to grow? What are their strengths? They're all in a particular role, but do they really belong there? Or can they do bigger things? Or should they be moved into a parallel role is something that you have to think through. And as I said, and then finally, like building the trust and making sure they're following the vision, like that is hard. And that's something you have to invest a lot of time and thought into. Definitely, I would say the like people aspect has been the biggest challenge, but something that I also enjoy investing in and growing that as
the people thing is definitely an interesting dynamic as you get in there, because there are bosses and there are leaders, and you can definitely tell the difference. And people who are listening probably have experienced both, if I had to guess. But it's just really, it's an interesting dynamic as you kind of start to get into it of you now are responsible for this person's career, right? Yes, to their success of the business, but also kind of helping shepherd them through this and taking the time to understand them. What makes them tick? What motivates them? And for some people, it's career progression. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's the title. For others, it's executive exposure. For others, it's work-life balance. And you've got to figure that out for each one of your people, what makes them tick. The best leaders and mentors I ever had, they understood where I wanted to go in the next 3 to 5 years. And this is something I try to do for my employees too, is I'll look at that and then say, how do we get you there? What does that look like? And one of my mentors from Microsoft, he left and we stayed in touch over all these years. Now he runs a farm to table co-op type thing, totally different. And he was in legal at Microsoft. But he ran into an issue where there just wasn't a spot for one of his employees to move up in the world at Microsoft anymore. And they were a rock star and basically said, it's probably time for you to look elsewhere. Like, I'm not getting rid of you because you're amazing, but there's just based on, right, there's only so many headcount. The company can only have so many of these different kinds of things and this and that. And sometimes there's just not upward growth available until someone quits or retires, right? And so he actually encouraged them, and he's like, says you got to push the bird out of the nest too, because people get comfortable, and that's actually being a good mentor. But like you want to have those kinds of relationships with your manager, well, ideally your mentor, who could be your manager. But yeah, and that's, I think, a big difference too between a leader and like that boss construct too, is a boss you would never tell that to. You're just going to do it. You're going to quiet quit. You're going to move on. And a leader and a mentor, you're going to have that open, honest conversation with them. And frankly, it's a better relationship to have. But it's been a weird dynamic to figure out how to navigate.
It is so interesting because one of the leaders I met recently asked me this question. He's like, are there people that have worked for you that have gone to become like your peer, your equivalents, or like even higher than you and kid you? And I was like, oh, of course there are. There's one or two. But that's your biggest moment of pride as a leader. Like,
Right.
if you groom and you develop somebody and they have, of course, they have bigger capacities and they go on to do bigger things. Nothing else can be a more proud moment for a leader. And you don't see that as a threat. You see that as, yes, they work with me. They have, but they've also used their talent and do bigger things. And that's what you want to do, actually. How many, and so one of the CMOs even told me, how many CMOs have you developed? That's a measure of your efficacy as a leader. And I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
That's a good measure. I'm trying to think through that. At least 2 or 3. I need to go back and check titles, but at least 2 or 3 in my background. One I'm particularly proud of, because she was like the events girl, was kind of what her like treatment was at the company. And I was talking with her, and I was like, what do you want to do? It was like, if you love events and all that kind of stuff, awesome. And I was like, but you're going to be limited in career. So if you can either go work for an agency where that's all they do and you can grow there, you can, if you like what you've done, you'll hit a ceiling pretty quick, but that's where that is. And I said, or you can go to like a big, a Salesforce, a Microsoft, where they do these big tents, and that's a full career, right? I said, or we can expand your portfolio, like your experience portfolio. And so we started to do that because that was the direction she was interested in. Now she's running marketing for a pretty big events company, the software events company. So where they make software for events. So it's kind of a fun, capitalized on it, but that's what I'm particularly proud of, is kind of through that development cycle. And I won't take full credit because obviously she did the work, but just like even having someone to ask you those questions, most people I find are lacking.
And that's our job as leaders, true leaders. So yeah.
So I want to come back to product marketing. What does product marketing mean? What is the job function? It can mean so many different things. How do you define it? And how have you seen it manifest across your career?
Yeah, and I wish I could share slides. It's a favorite picture of mine that I always have when I put my charter for any team that I lead. Of course, the product pipeline, but also like product adoption. How many customers have actually product that you launched? How many have actually deployed and using it and continue using it? I think that's critical too. I think the third thing for me that matters a lot is the analyst placements. When you're in B2B software, again, analyst placements, that's a key measure, and how you're moving up the quadrant, etc. I know people have different opinions on those, how that happens, but I think it's still a critical measure for all of us, I would say.
Nice. I like those. Yeah, the analyst is I've worked with some pretty awesome analyst relations people in product marketing, and they do a lot that goes under the radar and unappreciated. And like that is a it feels like a rigged game you're constantly fighting against, and takes just time and effort there. So, but it is important. So, all right, fun question here. What do you think are the top 3 myths that product marketers face, or that people believe about product marketing that aren't true?
I have a whole list. I even did a video at my last company with my employees on this. They introduced product marketing. I said, let's start with the myths of product marketing, right? I think the most common one is like, what does product marketing do? Makes pretty slides, right? Like you can make my slides pretty. Like
Yeah.
it's like, can you like, hey, here's a slide. I have a critical client meeting. Can you make it prettier for me? And I'm like, that is not our job. Like we have a designer, but again, that's not what we do. I think that's the biggest one. It's such a misunderstood function that they just think we're a content provider. But as I mentioned, we are so much more than that. Is the right positioning, right? Like, what do you need? That's the first question. And people come and tell me, like, I want a video. I'm like, okay, what is your purpose for this video? First, tell me, what are you trying to do here?
Right.
Then I'll recommend whether you need a video, a data sheet, an infographic, or maybe nothing at all.
Or we might already have it. You just didn't find it.
We use what we have. So that's that. I think the second one is I'm seeing more and more is like, oh, we built this product here, go launch it in 2 weeks. And I literally had someone come and tell me last December, I think it was in one of the December time frame, mid-December, one person sets up a meeting from product and like, hey, we built this. It needs to just get launched like in 2 weeks, like just launch it. And I'm like, okay, first of all, you have like, okay, nobody launches a product in like the holiday time frame, like January 1st, but first, like you don't come to product marketing after you built the product and say go launch. Like product marketing needs to have a seat of it, like right from the time the product is conceptualized. That's how like I've always done my product launch roadmaps. And when I build the process, it's right at the beginning that you work closely with product, trying to understand who your customers, what problem are we solving. In fact, sometimes we even tend to write out a press release and say, this is what it will look like. Are you game with this? Now let's go start building the bill of materials for this as we are ready. And let's go test it out with customers. Let's get those customer stories before you. And so there's a whole launch process. So that's a misunderstood one. I think the third one, I will say, I don't know if it's a myth, but everybody thinks they're a marketer. And I'm like, everybody is a marketer. Yes, everybody has a creative side. That's great. And it's like, if you want a career in marketing, you're more than welcome, like to apply for the role and let's have a conversation and see if you want to get into marketing. But I often get, it's like, hey, I saw this on this competitor's website. I think we should do something like this. Like, what do you think? And I'm like, no, I don't think we should do that. So there is that component. How do you avoid everyone like who tries to be a marketer and like in good intent, obviously, but you also have to call the shots sometimes. That's where I would leave it.
Going back to the launch, I'd be curious your take on this. Like in releases, I operate under the philosophy, not all releases are created equal. There's some stuff worth making a lot of noise about. And honestly, there's some like, we did it type thing. And I've heard some CMOs and PMM leads lean into this, like, okay, well, let's aggregate everything up until it's worthy of market mention. And I've also heard others be like, hey, like, we'll have 1-2 big ones a year, maybe, and everything else is kind of trickled out. And they try to do that around an event type thing. And then you have others that are like, everything needs a press release and everything needs all of this because everything we do is a big deal. Like, where do you fall in that spectrum of releases and what do they get?
That absolutely. I think this has happened a couple of times in my career too. Yeah. An absolutely good, robust launch process should be like 6 months out. And we build that launch process and framework. And then obviously people come and tell me, hey, your 6-month thing doesn't work for me. Like I need to, like the market can't wait. Like my sales team can't wait. Like we need to. So it's always about like finding that fine balance. But again, as I said, but then launching it in 2 weeks is also not the right answer there. So there's definitely, I like the tiering process, but I know that tiering can also lead to a lot. Like there's usually companies will bucket into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 launches.
Yeah.
Tier 3 is like the releases, the feature enhancements. Tier 1 is like your biggest product, your biggest revenue driver. And then tier 2 are your medium size. And then how you define it can vary from company to company. Sometimes what you think is just a media, like a feature that's bunched up, can make a difference to your customers. So it really, you have to analyze what works for your portfolio, for your customers, and where your company is, who your competition is in deciding that. But
Yeah.
I definitely think it's so critical. I mean, I have seen both ends of it, where you're launching a product without the process and you're just like hurriedly, okay, here's some materials, here's something for sales to take it. Versus doing when it's a really a prime feature that you want to make it a difference for your customers, for the market, for your sales teams. Doing it the right way of bringing all the functions, making sure your sales teams are enabled, making sure your pre-sales team is ready, making sure your partners and implementation teams are ready to implement it. That can make a huge difference to your customer satisfaction. You may be successful selling a product
Right.
but are your customers going to be happy and adopting the product downstream? So that I think that's where I feel the launch process is so critical.
And that's even taking PMM into beyond launch to adoption, which is often, I think, forgotten as you go through that motion there. So shifting gears a little bit, as you look back on your career to date, what is your biggest regret so far that you have?
That's a good question. I will say, I mean, when I was in business school, I remember like everybody, if you go to, I think most business schools these days, like the top ones, well, like half the class wants to go into management consulting. A lot of them definitely would like to go. And I think that it was the same when I was in business school too. Everybody wanted to do consulting. They're all prepping for the case studies. Somehow at that time, I just decided consulting was the right career for me. Like I did it in a few interviews, but I was like, I think there were a couple of reasons why I chose not to. And I said, one, I think I was just getting married at the time. And I was like, oh, there's a lot of travel. I don't want to be traveling all the time, like on a weekly basis. And then the second reason was for me, I'm a people person. I love building in any career or job that I'm in. I like to build relationships with people. I like to work with people. I like to see things come to fruition. Like you work on something, you have to see the fruits of it. Not always possible, but majority of it, like what you're putting out, you should be able to see the other end of it. And I felt like a consulting career wouldn't give me that. I was like, yeah, you're doing a project with a client here, and then like 3 months later, you shift to something else. You don't even know if the client used what you did or not. And
Right.
that's it. And so I said, I'm not going to do it. And so I chose going into software. But although there are some, for the first few years, definitely, or even sometimes I'll regret, like maybe I could have done consulting for a couple of years. That would have been good. Like, I think for me to get a couple of years of experience working with different industries, different clients, different maturity models would have been helpful to be successful. But I feel like I've gotten it over the time now with my career shifts. But that's something that I will always think of.
I kind of went after my MBA, or during it, I got the chance to intern with Slalom, whose entire motion, I didn't really appreciate what I was getting access to of like the top tier type consulting talent that stayed local. So I ended up moving on and doing other stuff earlier in my career. That's one I probably should have stuck around with a little bit longer, because you do learn a lot and you get the permission to go explore. And it's definitely a good opportunity if people are looking at that. But yeah, that I know when I have friends who did the traveling bit, and it took toll on families and relationships and all that kind of stuff. So it's something you do have to think about.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Yes.
So fun question. What is the biggest risk that you took across your career? Why'd you decide to do it, and did it work?
I would say the biggest risk is for me is yet to be taken. My biggest risk would be when I become a full-fledged CMO. I feel like I've done many parts of marketing, but I haven't led the marketing function in its entirety for a mid-sized company, and that's my goal. So waiting to take that risk, still building up my experience towards it. So I would say that's. But if you ask me to reflect on my past, and if I were to pick something, I think the one that I mentioned before, where I moved from a large enterprise, even though I moved multiple jobs within SAP and went to different parts of the business, did multiple roles, all of that. I think moving to a smaller company, a hyper growth company, was like, as I mentioned, I saw people like doing that and then coming right back and said, oh no, we missed the larger enterprise world. And so they came back. So that was the big, I felt I took. And definitely I gave it a long time, 11 years. There were other reasons, personal reasons tied to it, because I was in a visa, work visa and things like that. But the moment I took the plunge, I am so much happier, I will say, like being in hyper growth companies. I've been in a VC funded company. I'm now in a PE driven company. And I've enjoyed like every bit of the world, being in a public company to where I am. And I think now I'm okay, like dabbling in any part, any size of company. I feel like I can be successful and add value as well.
I love that. I mean, it is a risk, right? When you make that level of shift. And there are seasons for those bigger companies, seasons for a higher risk. As you go through those different things, seasons to be, employee number 2 or 3 or, top 10, and you're burning the candle at both ends. But there's also times when that's just not right for your stage in life there. And so it definitely can be a risk making those jumps. So as you look at the landscape today, as you think about your experience and everything that's gone on with that, what do you see are the biggest challenges ahead for marketers? What do they need to be thinking about doing to stand out? Because our world is constantly shifting.
Mhm. Absolutely. The shift, I feel out like technology driven and now, of course, AI driven. And you and I can see the shift from marketing, right? Like from where we were to the plethora of tools that are now available to marketers. There's like so many tools, like from, of course, you've got the demand bases of the world and all of those. But like last week, I was at a CMO conference and I saw this company that does they use AI and ML to do brand intelligence. They are run constantly in the background. They've got a method to come up with the scores and show you what your brand rating is in comparison to some of the other players in your space. I was like really wowed by it. Like I was like, wow, like brand intelligence, like we're used to doing surveys, right? Like
Right.
figuring out ways to see whether people understand your brand. And now you have an always on brand intelligence platform that you're using. So that's the extent of like the technology influence. And I'm sure there's like more on the way with AI coming in. There's going to be a plethora of tools that will be available to us. But I feel like ultimately, I think it all comes to we are still selling to humans in the B2B world, at least. And so it's like, how do you keep that human factor like front and center of what we're thinking? Yes, we can use all of these tools to aid our customer intelligence, to know more about our customers, to tailor that messaging to customers. But at the end of the day, the customer should feel like driven. Yes, this company cares about me. This tool is going to make my life better, make my work easier, and just that connection, keep that connection going. I think it's going to be a challenge. It continues to be a challenge, I would say.
I've heard CEOs and stuff like, oh, we don't need a content team or this or that anymore. We'll just use ChatGPT to write all this stuff. And it's like, you've got to think through the experience, because that is how people, yes, they need to check their boxes and things like that, but very often it's the experience that they have with you and your brand is going to dictate where and what they go with. And I think we're seeing a resurgence of that desire for human connection come back, of it's something to see face to face, to shake a hand, to talk about stuff live. The AI has got a long ways to go, I think, to being able to do that. I know people are trying to do those things. I also think it's hard to orchestrate, to your point on that, like that human element, where it's like, hey, what are the things that we can do to add positivity over time, like every interaction, so that when we have to do something that kind of impacts that relationship score, like asking for your contact details, right? Or when it's all fun talking through it till we get to contracting. Now it's no longer fun anymore. But like, if I built up enough of a positive emotion and relationship with you to draw on that as you go through it, I think we're going to see a shift back to this whole kind of buyer value kind of experience journey that we talked about for so long. AI, I think, is going to enhance it, but it's definitely can't be the heartbeat of it as you go through it there. So I think that's a really good call out.
Absolutely. I think the tools only go far as how well we use it.
Well, that too.
It's in the hands of the user at the end of the day. So very well said. Yeah.
That too. I mean, it's a lot of people have access to the same tool, right? ChatGPT, and get drastically different results, even just based on how they use it. So it's always, and I think I'm probably on a more experienced end than most people, but even I still have so much to learn on it. And I think, frankly, if you think you know it all in the space, then you're wrong. It's kind of like somebody calling themselves, the expert, the ninja, the guru, right? Whatever those phrases are, it's like, run away from them. They don't know what they're talking about. So I always love to ask this question. What are your 3 must-have technologies in your tech stack?
I'm going to say more like, okay, these are the technologies that I'm a real fan of, for sure. So one, I'll be biased because I'm at Anaplan. And for sure, Anaplan, like we use something called Anaplan on Anaplan. So, I mean, I'm just amazed with this tool. Obviously, I learned about Anaplan after coming in, but what it can do for marketing planning, including like budgets, but really even the analytics and reporting side of it is just amazing. Like how you can like look at different views and you can like change it any way you want and like So I think that definitely Anaplan, if you nobody's checked it out, I highly encourage you to it for sure. So like how you use it. Of course, one of my other favorites has been demand based because I think off late I've been doing a lot of more ABM type of we're doing that ABM shift, and so demand based definitely I think I'm a big fan of it. Third one, maybe I'll be biased again towards product marketing, but one of the tools that I've recently come to like is Clue as for competitive intelligence, because I don't think we covered it when I talked about product marketing, but definitely competitive intelligence, both doing competitive intelligence for your messaging, but also giving that information to your field is highly important. And I'm so glad like there are now tools in that space. There's several of them to choose, but I've used Clue in the past, and I really liked like how it's easy to bring in all those information to lay it out to keep them constantly updated as well.
We might have to have you back on a deep dive into competitive intelligence because it's an interesting vein of what's effective, what's not, what's kind of white hat, black hat, and then the gray area in between. So that might be worth doing a deep dive on in the future on that one, because I think we would probably fill a whole episode with that. So last question here as we're wrapping up. You've had a very successful career. You're a marketing executive. You've been at well-known companies. What is one piece of advice that you either got that has really propelled you, or that you would share that you think people should know, that you wished you knew earlier on in your career to help marketers out today?
Yeah, I will tell you one of my most favorite topics that I love talking anytime the career related conversation comes up is mentorship. And I can't even begin to tell you, I could talk about it all day. But I've benefited so much from my mentors. Like I am where I am today. I am what I am because of my mentors. So I will absolutely admit that. They have spotted talent in me. They have spotted opportunities that I should grow into even before I could. And it's interesting because mentors don't give you the answers, right? You go to a problem with a problem to them, they don't give you answers, but they ask you the right questions that make you and like come up, and they're a way to keep you focused on your career growth. So this is the biggest advice I would say. If those of you who are serious about building your career in marketing or wherever, definitely having a mentor. And again, mentors come and go. It's not like you have the same mentor for like a long period of time. There's definitely some relationship come to a natural end and then you move on, or you have multiple mentors. But it's like you have to find the right mentor. There have been relationships where I know, like I get matched by a system and it hasn't worked out for me. And we know that, but very politely, respectfully, it's always good to get out of that and say, for whatever it's worth, you get that what benefits you can from that mentor, and then we move on to finding someone else. But that I think is absolutely important for people, is how I would say. And I'm happy to like chat more. I know people often ask, how do you find the right mentor?
I was going to ask, how if you had to keep it short, but like, how do you engage someone that you admire from afar? Maybe you see them on LinkedIn, you're like, oh my goodness, that person I love what they're posting. I want to be where they are. Like, how do you approach that person?
And my simplest answer to that is like ask respectfully. If you see someone that you've like heard in a podcast, or you hear even in your own company, you see them speaking at an all hands or somewhere, and you feel, hey, I think he or she could be my mentor. I think the first thing you do is like ask them for a coffee. And I don't think that one no one says no to, mostly not. Like if you ask this, I always say if you ask, there's a 50% chance you're going to get a yes. But if you don't ask, you're never going to. So make that commitment, go ask them out for a coffee and then like have a chat with them saying, this is what I'm thinking. And that one conversation can define whether you are comfortable with them being your mentor. Oh, I learned so much from this person. They could be my mentor. And then you ask, and I know different people have different ways when you ask them to be a mentor. Some of them are like, okay, I want to know from you, what are you expecting to get out of this relationship? Like, what do you want? There are people like that. And for me, it's more loosely based. I'm like, hey, I just need to generate mentoring from you as I'm like in this role and this is where I want to go. And people say, like, if they say yes, then you take it from there. It's on you to define the agenda for the meeting. It's on you to show up, because it's also valuable time that they're giving up.
Right.
I've always I've found people just like, okay, sure, like let's, and they don't know the answers to every question, but they're going to ask you questions to make you think and come up with that answer ultimately. So that's how I
I think that's, and be okay with no, and offer them that out. I think the other big thing I'd add on there is make it crystal clear when you're doing the ask. You are not going to pitch slap them as soon as you get them on the phone, because I think that happens especially senior marketers, we're all used to like, oh, I accept the LinkedIn connection and bam, it's like, come take a meeting and pitch me. And it's like, no, that's not what this is for. So I would say like lower their defenses maybe a little bit with that, because realize they are being pinged all the time by SDRs and people who could be posing as potential mentees.
That is true. And yeah, you're right. Don't go with the intention of, I need a job with the person, so I'm going to pretend to be a mentor. Like, no, be honest and be transparent what you're getting. And then I mentor some people that are actually looking for jobs, but they know that I can offer them a job, and I know that I can't really like hire them in my team because of whatever the rules and their experience. Right. But I'm always like helping them, connecting. Of course, some mentors will connect you to their network. Not all of them will. Some of them would. But at least others will like give you guidance on like where else you could go to. This is what you could be doing to position yourself better, etc.
Yeah, I would say to the students listening, you have a particular advantage that I would call out that most students don't do. It's what I call the student card, not your physical one, but like the fact that you're a student right now. And while you're in program, reach out to people. Say, hey, I'm studying this subject right now. I find it really interesting, but I want to hear a real world experience. Would you be willing to spend some time with me? Ideally, if they're local, go in and meet them in their office. If they're coming in, and then when you finish meeting with them, if it went well, you can ask, hey, would you mind if I ping you every now and then? Also, if your professors are awesome, hopefully your projects are kind of real world in nature, you could ask to base a project off of their company or their function. But the biggest thing is when you finish meeting with them, ask if there's one or two other people that they think you should connect with in their network, and keep doing it.
I was going to say that, and I've used that trick, and that's how I built my network. You can always use that. I used my newbie card when I was at SAP, and I made sure like every week, I made it literally for 2 years. Like I would not have lunch. I would have lunch with a new person every week. At least I would try to. Sometimes people, of course, will reschedule. But always like at the end of the meeting, who are 3 other people that you think I should talk to? And when you're new, it's easier, like using the newbie card. But even otherwise, like if you're building your network, that's a great way to add more. That's a lovely tip. I like that.
Building on each other is how we get to where we're going. So awesome. Well, I think that puts us at time here. Thank you so much for being on, sharing your chai with us, your perspectives on marketing today. It was an absolute pleasure. And until next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you to everyone listening.
Thanks, y'all.